This is Conversations with a Gender Therapist Q&A, where a gender therapist answers questions from those who are transgender, non-binary, gender questioning, as well as those who love them. I'm your host, Dara Hoffman-Fox, licensed professional counselor. Let's get on to today's question. So today's question, I'm going to be doing a screen capture because there's a resource that I want to share with you that it's just easier if I show it to you on my computer. So the question that I'm going to read to you today, and you'll get a little sneak peek at how I keep track of your questions here. It's going to be this one. I would like to hear about how to learn to trust your feeling and perception of your own identity. How to tell it's not just your mind playing games, and how to stop that persistent inner discussion about your own gender. So, what I want to share with you is a chapter from my book that I wrote in which I address this. The name of this chapter is it actually this or is it actually that? Here's a note about my book. If you're watching this before September 2017, my book is currently technically not available because I self-published my book in June of 2016, and then I was approached by a publisher named Skyhorse Publishing in New York, and they said they wanted to publish my book. They are going to be publishing it in September 2017, but that also meant that I had to take my book off the shelves for 6 months, so it has not technically been available since March 2017. I have seen that people every now and then on Amazon are selling copies of it, perhaps because they are selling their own copy or they had gotten other copies of it and they're selling it. So feel free to, if you're like, oh my gosh, this sounds amazing, to check on Amazon, look up the title, You and Your Gender Identity, A Guide to Discovery, to see if there's any copies there. Otherwise, the chapter is going to be pretty much the same in the new version that's coming out in September. Okay, so let's start taking a look at this chapter. When it comes to wrestling with those questions that the viewer had asked about, how do you know you can trust your own instincts about this? One of the biggest things that I've seen in my experience is that there's a lot of questions that come up where you don't know, are you really trans, or are you transgender, or are you really, not your assigned gender at birth, or is it this, or is it that, or is it that, or is it that? And so because I noticed that as a pattern, that's why I wanted to write this particular segment of my book. So the first part I just go over here is that the first part of the sentence, is it actually this? That's going to be different for everybody. The first part of your sentence might be, as you can see here, a few examples. Am I really trans? Am I really transgender? Do I really have gender dysphoria? Am I really a guy? Am I really a girl? Am I really a man? Am I really a woman? Am I really not a male? Am I really not a female? Am I really non-binary? As you can see, there are different ways that you in particular are asking yourself this question, so that's why I list all the different examples so you can make it feel right to you. This is the question you are asking yourself. And again, your question could change over time and multiple times. That's totally fine. So the second part of the question, or is it really just that? Here in the book, I mentioned that these questions can be limitless because it's going to have to do with every person's unique life, what they've been through, what they're questioning, what they're taking with them. So you're going to see here that I have a lot of questions here listed because, again, this is from my experience that there are a lot of different things that different people are going to be coming from different angles to ask themselves. Some of the ones that I think I have heard most often, you'll see here, is this really just a reaction for me having experienced trauma during my childhood? So that was here. Am I really just gay or lesbian? This one, is it really just a fetish? That comes up especially for my older clients who, in the past, there's been a lot of really negative commentary that has to do with being trans actually being a fetish. So that's something that could come up for some of you. Is this really just an escape from reality? So as you can see, there's a lot of different questions here that you can, even if you can't go through all these right now, at least it's totally normal that you could have lots of questions. Is this really just a midlife crisis that I'm going through or a general life crisis? As you can see here, am I really just desperate to find any answer as to why I feel so depressed and hopeless? Am I really just lonely and looking for a community? So these are different questions that come up because when it really comes down to it, so let's go down to the next part of this. Why so many questions? The reason that I think so many people do ask themselves challenging questions like this about, it's almost like trying to convince themselves that maybe they're really not trans. For one, the first reason that happens is because there is no actual test that you can take to tell you if you are trans or not. There's not a blood test. There's not a test you can take online. There's not, at least right now, a brain scan, even though some folks are saying that we're getting closer to that. But when it comes down to it, you have to actually just be able to figure this out yourself and hope that people believe you when they tell you that this is what's going on. So what I say here is when it comes down to it, you are the one that has to make the call. So because of that, you are going to go through this process of questioning and checking in with yourself and going back and forth between, is this really happening or is this not really happening? So I'm actually saying this is a healthy part of your process. It's a frustrating part of the process because of how confusing it can get. And it can actually cause a lot of people to delay their transition because of that that confusion. And so moving on, what I wanted to offer was how can you best approach these questions? So my hope is to be able to help you be able to figure out, look, this is normal that I have these challenging questions that come up that continue to make me wonder if I'm really going through this or not. So the first thing I do mention first and foremost is to watch for internalized transphobia. So the reason I want to make sure you watch for that is because when it comes down to it, if you really ask yourself, do I really just hope I'm not trans? Do I really hope I'm not transgender? And there's a lot of reasons that could come up for you. You could be like, oh my gosh, this would just really be difficult if it turns out I'm trans. And so therefore, are you hoping to convince yourself that you're not? Are you hoping it's going to be something else that's going on? So that's something that you really need to take some time to be honest with yourself and ask yourself, is this really about me really just hoping I'm not trans? And that right there could help you, even though it's difficult, it could help you narrow down some of the questions you keep asking yourself, because you might realize, I'm really just trying to talk myself out of this. Seek out counseling. I always suggest that if you can and if you're able to. I know it can be really difficult for some folks. Depends on where you live. Depends on your socioeconomic status. Depends on if you can find a person who understands gender identity questions. But if you can have a counselor, that way you can help go through your questions layer by layer, one at a time, and be able to hopefully come to a conclusion about each separate layer, and then you look at it together with your gender identity. So I'm going to post a link to an article I did write on my website that goes through an example as to how you can go through this process of figuring this out, especially if you don't have a counselor. If you're not able to get one, you can look at how you can maybe do this on your own. And please keep in mind, even if you can't get a counselor, you could perhaps talk to someone else who you feel like you can trust with this, who you can just even be able to bounce your ideas off of. And that could be maybe, if you are in school, maybe there's a type of school or guidance counselor. It could be a coach, it could be a family member, maybe a local youth group leader or a local pastor, somebody that you, if you can actually, sorry about that, if you can actually trust to talk to them about this. Next idea I have is that you can conduct tests and experiments. I do address this in the article that I just mentioned. And what that means is, for instance, when somebody, I'm going to give the example of somebody wondering if they actually have, I've heard this quite a few times from my clients. They wonder, well, maybe I actually have obsessive compulsive disorder. And, let's say they've never been diagnosed with OCD. It's never come up before, but they're like, I think this might be actually what it is. I'm really not trans. What I would suggest to that client is, when it comes down to it, first of all, learn about OCD, read about it, find out what it really is and start to question whether or not this seems like this is what it is. And if you really want to find out, find a trusted psychiatrist or a psychologist that you can talk to and actually see if you're going to end up getting a diagnosis for OCD. Now, let me make it clear. You can have be diagnosed with OCD and be trans. Absolutely, both can happen. But if you're trying to ask yourself this question and needing to find that out, let's say you do have OCD and you get treatment for that and you still feel like you're trans, then you've answered your question. And that's usually how it ends up going. So you can conduct different tests and experiments to try to figure out a little bit more about what's going on. Give it time. Obviously it's going to take patience and time for you to answer some of these questions. Some of it, could go really deep. You're asking yourself if it's because you've had certain traumas from your childhood. Well, those need to be worked through anyway. So it's really actually quite helpful to be able to work through those childhood traumas. And through that experience, you'll be able to gain more clarity as to how it affected you as a whole, and then also be able to see it separately from your gender identity questions. I also mention here to wait a bit before taking irreversible actions. Main example I can think of with that would be starting hormone therapy, coming out in certain ways that you would have a difficult reversing that. So this is not to say that if you really do realize and recognize that you are trans, that you should not go through those steps. This has to do with if you have a huge question on your mind, like, is this really, really me? Or is this really something else? Do the best you can to address that concern and at least to lower the percentage of your doubt. I'm not saying, like I say here, this does not mean you should wait until you feel 100% certain. That day will likely never come. Reduce the percentage of your doubt. You could say, when you first start looking at this, I feel doubtful 75% that this might not really be what's going on. I might not be trans. So then you take some time to look at these different layers, your different questions, and you're like, you know what, right now I feel like I'm at 10% or even 15% doubt. It's gone way down. That would be a better time to then be able to start thinking about, should I then take another step towards perhaps towards transitioning or coming out. And so that's one way to be able to think about it in terms of taking irreversible action. So again, not that you need to be 100% certain, but to just be able to lower your doubt enough so that when you take these actions, it more than likely will help you rather than be something that ends up being difficult to navigate. Remember to give your thinking self a break. This is a reference to a past chapter that I talk about, because that's really about going through the process of, like how your thoughts can just take over and make you a little bit frustrated and confused and uncertain. And so being able to take a break from all that thinking, that would mean being able to take time to be creative, be emotional, be intuitive, things that can give your mind a rest, but you're still going to be exploring it in different ways. Stop and reflect. So as you're working through each of your questions that you're having, be sure to pause and then ask yourself, okay, so now I'm exploring, for instance, let's say, am I really gay? Am I really lesbian? As you're trying to figure out that specific question, pause and ask yourself, all right, my questions about my gender identity, how often are they coming up? How intense are they? And how much time, over how much time have they still been coming up? So as you continue to work through some of the other questions, do your questions about your gender identity subside? Do they stay the same? Do they actually increase? And you need to give yourself, this isn't going to be like after one day of trying to figure stuff out kind of thing. Give yourself some time, because you might at first notice, oh, that's cool. Like, I feel like my questions about my gender identity have gone down. And then you might be like, whoops, that lasted like 3 days and now they're back again. So like I said, one of the reasons this can be so hard is that it's scary for a lot of people to perhaps entertain the notion that perhaps you really are trans, you really are transgender. And so that is something that keep it in the back of your mind that if it turns out that this is true, that it's okay. We're going to figure out a way to get through this. And when I say we, I say the collective we, because it's not only going to be people, hopefully at least a few people in your close life, people on the internet, people like myself. These are the kind of things that we're here for you to help you with. The last part I'm going to address right now, because the video is getting kind of long, is unbecome what really isn't you. There's a quote that I mentioned earlier in the book, which I heard that advises people to unbecome everything that really isn't you, so you can be who you were meant to be in the first place. So that means, like, imagine inside of yourself is the true you, who you really are, and there's just all this stuff that's kind of just like crowded inside of you. It's blocking it. It's just interfering. That could be things that it could be messages you got from when you were young. It could be society, influential people in your life. It could just be just on and on. It could be so many different things. What you're going to try to do is figure out which of those things aren't you. That is not me. That is not me. That is not me. And then the hope is that through that process, it'll actually reveal who is really you. Because a lot of times when you go through this, you're like, I don't even know who the real me is. And that's a totally understandable feeling to have. That's the whole point. You're trying to figure out who you really are. So sometimes you can shift your perspective and figure out, who am I not actually? Work on that, and it's going to start telling you, oh, does that mean this is really who I am? So the chapter does go on where I kind of encourage you can cluster these questions into different categories, such as the assumption that you must be either male or female, that you have an unexpressed inner persona. We also have the intersection of sexual orientation and gender identity, the influence of trauma and or mental illness, doubts about your sanity, questions around this being a fetish or a kink. And so, again, this is based on my experience in working with clients, and also from all the messages I've gotten from folks who watch these videos and follow me on Facebook, that kind of thing. Sorry, I'm probably making you dizzy right now. So hopefully the background noise wasn't too weird. I am at my office, and it is a Sunday, and there's this crazy festival going on outside called Territory Days, and there's just music and what people do at festivals, all that kind of stuff. So hopefully it wasn't too distracting. Thank you for the question. This was a little bit longer than usual video because this is a question I think that can really trip a lot of people up, and I wanted to be sure to give you that extra bit of information to help you along the way. I will be back again next week with another episode of Conversations with a Gender Therapist, Q&A, and in the meantime, please leave any comments below that you think might help other people, or if you have experience with this that you want to share, be sure to subscribe, and that way you'll be notified whenever I create another one of these videos. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.